everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer. Welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film, and we're getting Lovecraftian, because that's a word, here on this episode of Welcome to the Wasteland as we tackle John Carpenter's Ode to H.P. Lovecraft in the Mouth of Madness. And I have my very good friend and fellow SiftPop writer, Foster, coming to join me. So, Foster, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You'll be seeing double dose of Foster within a couple of weeks because we'll be doing vampires in a couple of weeks too. And this is might be one of the few movies released in the 90s or 2000s that actually have some kind of following from John Carpenter, because a lot of his later stuff not so great. But we'll be getting into that soon, because if you haven't tuned into the show before, we have three segments here. We have coming attractions, so we'll be talking about what releases we're most excited for April 21st, 2023. Then we'll do our feature film, which is indeed In the Mouth of Madness, and then we'll be doing some recommendations for everybody. But let's get things started with coming attractions, which we have a pretty stacked week. Honestly, April has turned into a giant dump of tons and tons of movies this month. If I'm not mistaken, this is probably the month with the most releases in any month since before COVID. And I feel like that's a healthy, good thing for movies, and a giant, how the hell am I going to handle this on my end time-wise, trying to figure out, because this coming weekend, there's 5 wide releases, and I have not seen any of them early. And I'm like, well, we're going to have some fun doing that. And I barely have any time next weekend. But, Foster, we have Chevalier and a lot of smaller films like documentaries for Little Richard and Judy Blume. We even have a Broken Lizard new movie coming out on Hulu about Quasimodo. But, Foster, what are you most excited for?
Quick asides. I'm also looking forward to Chevalier. I think that trailer is actually
Mm.
super fun. And I'm also looking forward to Carmen because apparently the music in that is ridiculous. It's Nicholas Britell, who's basically my favorite composer right now. But Evil Dead Rise is the one that I'm really, really excited about. Um, I mean, I like the other Evil Dead movies. I actually really, really like the 2013 one, which is very different from the others, but it seems like Evil Dead Rise is more like the 2013
Given
Evil
that
Dead.
vibe.
Yeah. Which it's like it doesn't have like the comedy elements necessarily, but I would say that doesn't mean that it's not fun because it's a lot of fun. It's like
Mm.
nasty, gnarly metal, like chainsaw wielding, raining blood type of fun. Like if I'm just imagining the theater will be kind of a blast because like even the trailers, there's a thing with a cheese grater or some glass swallowing action that goes on and like the reactions everybody has this even just from the trailer. So I don't know, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I haven't seen the remake yet. And one of the reasons is I was afraid.
Mm.
Because I don't handle sharp objects and stabby things. Like, I'm horribly afraid of needles. I went with my friend Haley one time for her to get a tattoo, and basically I had to turn my back to her and just hold her hand. Because me trying to be supportive. And there's a lot of things that looks like that's not great. And then the trailer for Evil Dead Rise, I'm like, I'm gonna be traumatized. And quick fun story. So my friend Haley visited this weekend as I've recording these episodes back to back days. So you'll hear about this on next week's episode too. But we went to go see Bruce-O-Rama, which is a live show with Bruce Campbell. And it's third of it is a game show, like a trivia nerd trivia game show, then stand up, and then we watched Evil Dead, which was a ton of fun with like 1,000 people in the theater just getting into watching the movie Evil Dead. But the winner of the trivia got one of those like press boxes that Warner Brothers sends out to people, and there's a cheese grater in it. And I'm like, there's blood red bath bombs too, and a whole
Mhm.
bunch of other stuff. But I'm like, that cheese grater, that's fun. I'm gonna
That's
love
wholesome.
that. But so the idea, like, I'm excited for this Evil Dead movie because it looks terrifying.
Hmm.
and like it's doing something very different with it, with like that family dynamic. I'm just, a scaredy cat, so we're gonna have fun.
Yep.
uh so we'll see if I'm okay. I will make sure to let Foster know if I'm emotionally okay, because I'm going to see it in a double feature too, with the film that I'm most excited for, which is Beau is Afraid. And I do, so like I remember when this was called Disappointments Boulevard. I'm like, I kind of like that name better than Beau is Afraid.
Hmm.
But when they released the trailer for this movie, I'm like, this looks nuts. And
Yeah.
here's the thing, it's Ari Aster, so it's going to be nuts. And you're probably going to get emotionally devastated in some shape or form, but it looks very different. So, like, it didn't look like a straight up horror kind of thing. And, Joaquin Phoenix is fantastic. I'm also morbidly curious after the inflow of 0 out of 10s I see, like, pretty big name people giving this movie. So, I feel like there's a lot to be excited for, at least a cinematic experience that is sitting in a theater for 3 hours and watching Beau is Afraid.
Yeah, I got to see this yesterday, and the 0 out of 10s are ridiculous. It is a really good movie, I think. It's a weird movie. I mean, there's a lot of strange stuff in it, but I thought it was actually super watchable. Like I was thinking, do you remember I'm Thinking of Ending Things on Netflix like a couple years
Yeah.
ago? That's sort of what I was anticipating. I was like, this is gonna be like really slow and maybe kind of inaccessible, but I thought it was really fun. Like it's really funny too.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's so many people in it that are so great. Like Nathan Lane and Amy Ryan are so good in it, and Nathan
Mm-hmm.
Lane is so funny. Patty LaPone comes in the last third and is kind of crazy. Um, and Richard Kind pops up too. Joaquin's
Nice.
great. But it's so well directed. It's not. I mean, like liking Hereditary or Midsummer has like no bearing on whether or not you'll like this movie. It's not. It's not really like a horror movie in the same way. But yeah, I thought it was really cool.
I'm very excited for it. And I'm perfectly fine sitting there for the 3 hours and just experiencing the mayhem and whatever. Because the second that Ari Aster described it as like the Jewish Lord of the Rings, I'm like, interesting, except in a man's head. And I'm like, our imagination has no limits. So I'm assuming this movie won't either. So we're going to have to see. And we're also going to have to see how many of these movies I actually get through next weekend. Because basically, I can't go Friday night or any of the time on Saturday. And I'm just like, I'm going to shove as many of these into Sunday as possible.
Yep.
But big movie day. But those are the coming attractions for April 21st. And now it's time to talk about In the Mouth of Madness. And if this title sounds familiar ish, it's because it's based off of the title In the Mountains of Madness from H.P. Lovecraft's novel. And this is indeed an ode to H.P. Lovecraft. And it's hard not to point out like some parallels with Stephen King and like the whole writer elements of things. And they even name drop Stephen King at some point during this film. But we have an insurance investigator who begins discovering that the impact a horror writer's books have on his fans is more than inspirational. And this obviously is directed by John Carpenter, because then why would I be talking about it on Welcome to the Wasteland at this point? And is written by Michael DeLuca, who has worked on such films in like producer capacity as like Moneyball and The Social Network and Captain Phillips, and starring Sam Neill as this insurance investigator. And we have the likes of David Warner and, of all people, Charlton Heston popping up in this movie, which that was probably the biggest surprise when I watched this for the first time. I'm like,
Hmm.
Charlton Heston was in a John Carpenter movie?
I know Charlton Heston from Wayne's World 2.
I know he came
Yeah,
such a long way from that
I know.
wonderful little scene that he had.
Hmm.
And of course, there's going to be a couple familiar faces that you see in literally every single John Carpenter movie for the most part. You go Peter Jason, who literally just pops up anywhere. But Foster, what interests you in coming on for this particular episode?
So I had never seen this one before, but I was really excited about it because it has kind of a cult following.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to be a part of this cult following because all I had all I knew about this movie is that it was about an author. I assumed that Sam Neill would be the author, but obviously not.
Mhm.
And I'd seen just the image of him like with his hair all fuzzied up and he has the crosses drawn all over his face. And I was like, that just looks like a movie for me. Um, yeah.
And what are some of your general thoughts on the film?
I really, really liked it. I feel like this is the kind of movie that will grow on me with time. Like I'll just continue to watch more horror movies and then be reminded of this one and think, wow, there really aren't many movies like In the Mouth of Madness. And I feel like that's what's going to happen. Like I can already see the future. Um, I also because so yesterday I watched two movies. I watched this and then Beau is Afraid. So it was all the like whatever weirdness in the Mouth of Madness took my brain through was kind of neutered by the end of the day. So um uh my brain is a bit scrambled right now. I also really like Sam Neill.
Mhm.
In this and in general. I think it's really fun that this is like his first big movie, like the next year after Jurassic Park. Um, like he picks a lot of interesting stuff, and he's kind of like a quietly done a good number of horror movies too. Have you seen the movie Possession?
I have not.
Have you heard of it? It's a pretty wild movie from like it's like it's in the 80s at some point, I think. I want to say it's like Isabella Johnny. That's got like a huge cult following, which
Mhm.
I don't even I've seen the movie, I don't fully understand it, but that's worth watching too. And I haven't seen the Omen movie that he's in, but he plays like a grown-up Damien at one point. So he's kind of like a
Interesting.
quiet like horror icon too, which is
Event
fun.
Horizon.
Yeah, but he's great in this. I mean, he's like kind of smug and full of himself through a lot of
Mhm.
it, but he perfectly sells the like descent into madness thing, especially by the like last couple scenes. Because like the promise of the movie is like you see him all crazy in the asylum in the opening, and
Mhm.
the movie has to convince you like that this, smug insurance business type man gets to that point by the end of the movie, and it succeeds, I think.
Yep.
What did you think?
That's a very interesting point too. Like this is the third time that I've watched this film.
Hmm.
I actually watched this last year too. Just randomly because like I own it after the first time I watched it, and then it's like, well, John Carpenter gonna be watching it again. And it's interesting because I do also recall seeing imagery from the film. Like the first thing that I knew about this film is like all the crosses drawn on
Hmm.
Samuel's face and like expecting him to be this complete nut job kind of character. And like us starting off in that situation where it's like the film starts in this asylum and you have like David Warner who's like in so many films from like the late 70s, 80s into the early 90s coming in and like looking at this man and yes, indeed us going on this crazy journey to see what the hell happened to this guy. There's definitely some elements of it where it's just like I'm still processing after three times watching the movie, but it all goes into like it you do have to suspend your disbelief of like not everything about this is going to 100% make sense. There's definitely going to be some elements that are there because it's just insanity and there's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason to explain it, but the way that this film warps reality and the imagery is terrifying. And then such a it's such a John Carpenter score, but it's like a heavy metal John
Yeah.
Carpenter score. It has a very different vibe to it, in particular, and it just gives this film a lot of personality.
Hmm.
And Sam Neill's great. And Sam Neill was the best part of Memoirs of an Invisible Man, the film before this that Carpenter did, and he was the antagonist in that. And here, like Sam Neill is just such a talented actor and is able to do all kinds of things. And his performance in this is very dynamic. You see him going from this I'm kind of looking down on you for thinking like something crazy's going on here. He's a man of facts. He's an investigator. So everything has an explanation. Everything has a mystery to be solved. And seeing him crack under the pressure of not really understanding what's going on with him and this strange little town that we find ourselves in this film and all the way leading up to just such a crazy final shot. This
Hmm.
movie, and this is such an insane film, and there's so much to love about it.
Yep, exactly. And I like that you mentioned the score too. I like the like Metallica kind of guitar song
Yeah.
that plays at the beginning. I was like, surely that's a real song. And then I looked it up afterwards. I was like, nope, that's just made for this movie, which is kind of crazy. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great imagery and stuff as it gets as they get to the town to Hobbs End, right? Is the
Yep.
name of the town. Yeah. And there's a whole lot of great stuff that this movie plays into. Like a lot of horror movies have this where one character sees something crazy and is not really fully believed by the other characters. So that's like the I can't remember her name who accompanies him to the town in the car on the car ride there.
Linda Styles. It looks like Julie Carmen's character.
Sure. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then it is super Stephen King like. I mean, clearly Sutter Kane is basically Stephen King.
Yep.
Even
Played
like
by Jurgen Prochnow.
yes. And like even from the like the letters of the names are close enough in the syllables. It's like
Yeah.
it's funny. And the like you said, the gall to name drop Stephen King at the beginning is pretty
Yeah.
funny. Um they're not even hiding their influences. But like especially once we get to that town, it has such good Stephen King energy, I feel.
Mhm.
And like the creepy interactions with the town members and the kids that are just running through the street, or the kid on the bicycle with the cards that are hitting the spokes of the wheel.
Yep.
Um, and like the painting behind him that changes every so often, and he like goes back to inspect to make sure, that there's nothing, no funny business, because of course it must be the publishing company that's behind all of this, for
Mhm.
promotion,
Yep.
he's a logical, reasonable man who will not be fooled by tricks. And
Won't be
then that
fooled by Charlton Heston.
yes. And that woman behind the desk is really creepy. And when you
Mhm.
see the her husband or whatever, she says like, "Don't smoke in here. My bothers my husband." And then the camera goes down to the floor, and he's just chained to her leg.
Yeah. It's just like, what is this place?
It's
Hey, there's
there's
so
so
many
much good
great
stuff.
the right from the jump with the investigator sitting in that restaurant
Yes,
and the guy just walking across the street with the axe in his
it's so
hand,
good.
and like, what a hook. Like,
Mhm.
that just puts you into this film, the music, the feel of it. This had, like, I don't know how to describe it, but like, actually I didn't even bother to check to see, so this is from cinematographer Gary B. Kibbe. It has the same kind of vibe as like they lit it's the same cinematographer.
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain point in like the mid to late 80s where John Carpenter's films started having a very specific look to them.
Mm.
And this was one of them, like Big Trouble in Little China. He was a camera operator. He did the cinematography on They Live. It just has this very like crisp, interesting look to it. And everything's framed so perfectly. And like, apparently he was the DP on Ghost of Mars, Vampires Escape from LA, Village of the Damned, In the Mouth of Madness. So basically, Prince of Darkness and They Live. Prince of Darkness, you can definitely tell there's like a visual change in Carpenter's films. And well, that makes a whole lot of sense because it's the whole same cinematographer. And I think it really works for this film because they really need to make this visually engaging, because there's moments where this goes nuts. And there's one particular sequence towards the end with like this cracked open reality,
Yeah.
and there's some crazy things chasing Sam Neill, and you're just like, this is terrifying.
Yep.
Like, there's some intense horror imagery here.
Yeah, anytime you're watching the opening credits of a movie and they credit the special makeup effects by, and you know you're in for something really, really
Yep.
crazy. Um, yeah, you lots of crazy things. You get Hayden Christensen on a bicycle towards the end of this movie. That's one of the
Yep.
craziest, I think. I didn't even realize that was him until afterwards.
small little cameos, or like undiscovered child actor and then turns into Anakin Skywalker.
Hmm.
But I feel like this film really lives and dies on Carpenter's creative construction of this madness going on in this film, and Sam Neill.
Hmm.
And like they're the driving forces of this. The technical aspects that Carpenter's able to deliver, and Sam Neill just anchors this whole entire thing down with
Hmm.
his performance. And it has such a sinister feel to it. They're just like always a feel of something sinister just waiting behind. And there's definitely moments where there's so many like, oh, jarred awake, I was in a nightmare. Jarred awake, I was in a nightmare. And like especially the second half of this film becomes so disorienting. And I'll even admit I have to like give myself a pass for just like, you know what? I'm just giving myself to this movie and
Hmm.
not trying to think too hard about does any of this make sense. But I think it really creates an experience. And
Yeah.
there's very few horror films that give you quite a strange, unnerving experience as this.
Yeah, and I think what seals the deal for me is it really just sticks the landing. Like when he gets out of the asylum and it's completely like 28 days later style empty,
Yep.
and goes to the movie theater and you see the poster directed by John Carpenter. And he sits there and he just starts laughing and then crying. It's so good. It's because
It,
of him. He sells it so perfectly.
this has such an awesome meta level ending as they live.
Oh, okay.
And like John Carpenter just like knows how to like flip a switch at certain points and just be
Hmm.
like, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. And you
Yeah.
all know what I'm doing here too.
Yeah.
And like, because like, have you seen They Live?
I have not.
Then I'm not going to spoil what happens at
Okay.
the end because they're just a reference to himself that I'm just
Okay.
like, oh, are you kidding me? That he went there. And like the whole idea of like him going in and watching the film that we're literally watching
Hmm.
is just such an unnerving, strange meta piece. And like you said, Sam Neill just sells the whole entire thing with his maniacal laughing at the
Hmm.
end.
Yeah,
But
and the idea like he's a character that's being written by Sutter Kane too, right? Is it's so cool and interesting, and I feel like would make a rewatch pretty fun.
it's like what would make a very interesting double feature with this Stranger Than Fiction.
Okay. Another one I haven't seen, but
Will Ferrell is a character in Emma Thompson's story. And I'm like, well, it's kind of that,
mhm.
but a lot weirder
Or
and a lot more
Nocturnal
fun.
Animals might be another good one.
My God, I don't know if I'd be able to handle watching this Nocturnal Animals back to back. What experience that would be. Um, just God, that story within a story in Nocturnal Animals is just so intense.
Mhm. If you're ever in too good of a mood, you can pop that on.
Watch Nocturnal Animals.
Yeah.
But Foster, do you have any final thoughts on In
I
the
don't
Mouth
think
of
so. I
Madness?
think I'm all used up.
We just shook all that madness out. So, if you haven't seen this particular John Carpenter film, I think this one is kind of the crown jewel of his later life of filmmaking. Because, like, at least everything I've watched so far, and just purely based off of reviews and people's thoughts on it, between this and Vampire seem to be the only movie that really has like critical praise at all at it. So I'm gonna enjoy this one and think about it while I'm watching some of the other ones. But we're wrapping things up here with some recommendations. So Foster, what would you like to recommend to everybody?
I'm gonna gently recommend Showing Up. It's a movie that just came out. It's directed by Kelly Reichardt. I assume that's how you say her last name. With Michelle Williams, Hong Chow, Judd Hirsch pops up in there for a minute.
Hmm.
Um, so her movies, I've only seen two of them, this and First Cow, but they're really, really, really slow. So not for everybody. But for whatever reason, like it just both of those two movies have lulled me into this nice, calm, peaceful state. And I feel like the slowness to me doesn't I feel like a lot of times it's kind of like the A24 thing that people make fun of, where it's like, oh, this is so A24, but I don't feel like it's a gimmick here. I don't feel like it's compensating for a lack of plot or anything. I actually just, it feels real to me, the slowness. It's like capturing these small little human moments. And also, this movie is pretty funny at parts, especially Hong Chow, who's so good, and I love
Mhm.
her. And um I mean, just like a huge crux of the plot revolves around Michelle Williams nursing this bird back to health.
Yeah.
And it's like the amount of time that's dedicated to just this small thing is really crazy, but I don't know. It just makes like all the little moments so much more meaningful, and the little moments of humor. Like, I'll just spoil. I don't know how nobody's gonna listen to this and then get spoiled for showing up. Who cares? But like, the bird is like tackled by her cat, Michelle Williams, and then Michelle Williams like puts it outside, tosses it outside the window. The next morning, Hong Chow says, "Hey, Michelle Williams, look what I found. Check out this bird." We have to take care of it. And it's like the two approaches are so funny. And then so Michelle Williams like begrudgingly takes care of it. But like, it is really funny. It takes place in like the Portland art scene.
Mhm.
And so there's like these people doing these weird hip dance classes out in the middle of the grass. And I can't remember, but one character is like, what class is that? And the other one's like, I have no idea, or something. And then Michelle Williams comes in and says what it actually is. But yeah, really nice little movie.
Yeah, and it has a nice cast to it too, like you mentioned. And one of the stars of First Cow plays the brother
Yes.
in it. That what a character he is in it. And that bird comes all the way back around,
Hmm.
quite meaningful in the
Yeah.
end. And yeah, it's a very kind of like mundane day in the life kind of experience about an artist and her process. And boy, does she make cool sculptures.
Hmm.
But like I really enjoyed it too. I liked First Cow more,
Me
but I
too.
do think that Kelly Reichardt does have a very specific and engaging and tender approach to filmmaking. And I think it works for like this kind of very day in the life, small little moments of humanity. And now for something completely different. I also have a soft recommendation. And it's less that I don't think this movie's great. I had fun with it. There's specific things that I did particularly love about it. Other things I'm just like, why are we even spending time on this? Is Renfield,
Ah,
which going for the Nick Cage. Also, this movie's only like 90 minutes, so like it's not a hard investment here, but like Nick Cage is enough to just a ball watching him play Dracula. And now I want an actual Dracula movie starring Nicolas Cage. And I feel like people are funny in it. Like Aquafina and Ben Schwartz are funny in it. Why did we spend so much time on storylines with them in it? I don't know. Um, I think a lot of people will be surprised what like the actual narrative of this movie is, and that it's not like just focusing on Renfield and Dracula, but like it's such a crazy blood fest, crazy dark comedy, and there's definitely moments in it that are worth it. And if you want a crazy fun movie to go see, there it is. But I have a fun story. I went to go see this with my wife and my our friend Paige yesterday. We're sitting in AMC in our seats, and there's a whole row of this dad and a bunch of kids. And they didn't even get it through the trailers when these red band trailers started popping up and dropping like F bombs left and right. And the dad's like, I don't think we need to stick around for this. And then he took the kids out. I was really tempted to move a row back because we got stuck in like the third row of like a reclining seat theater. I'm like, well,
hmm.
if they're not coming back, but I'm too law governed to be like, that's not my seat. I'm not sitting in it. But like Renfield's fine. But here's a strong recommend. So on the upcoming episode of the Development Hell podcast with my movie club, we're going to be talking about Goodfellas, which I just rewatched last night. And this is a film that's definitely grown on me over the years. Scorsese has grown on me specifically because like I didn't really like his movies when I watched them when I was younger. I'm like, why is everybody just an a-hole and just cursing all the time? Because like when you strip it down, that is many Martin Scorsese movies.
Like
But
15 years later, now you get it.
now it's like, it's funny, as a 31-year-old Italian American, I greatly appreciate the representation and like these movies speak to me in a way that not a lot of filmmakers do. And I think I grew that appreciation for Scorsese over the course of Welcome to the Wasteland when I watched every single one of his films. And watching Goodfellas, it's endlessly quotable and entertaining, impressive filmmaking, like the Cabana scene of just like that long tracking shot through the whole club and everything. And Ray Liotta's great. Of course, Joe Pesci. Funny like a clown, funny do I amuse you? And De Niro and Paul Sorvino and basically any Italian American actor. And it also made me think of an important question. Are you really an Italian American actor if you haven't been in a Martin Scorsese movie? I think it's an important question to think about. But if you haven't seen Goodfellas, also, if you don't like a lot of violence and a lot of cursing, then don't watch Goodfellas or most of Martin Scorsese's movies. Go watch Hugo instead. But those are our recommendations for all of you out there. And Foster, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me as always.
Would you like to shamelessly plug anything before we wrap up?
Sure. Letterboxd, FOSTH 101.
And Letterbox is great. That's how I knew Foster already saw Beau is Afraid, because I looked at his review earlier. But thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.